Len Khodorkovsky, thanks for joining us on Jerusalem Dateline.
Thanks so much for having me.
In the last couple of weeks, we've seen protests that started in one province that has spread to different parts of Iran. How significant are those protests right now?
You know, it's hard to say what is going to be the last straw that breaks the regime. You had a buildup of protests over various decades. They've ramped up over the Trump administration. In fact, in November 2019, the protests in Iran were probably the most significant pressure on the regime internally since 1979. The regime ended up massacring 1,500 Iranians and turning off the internet. This is the playbook that they're using right now as well. People were out protesting because they're thirsty. The regime is so corrupt and inept that it has basically taken a country that's rich and has plenty of resources and made it a desert. Unlike Israel, may I point out, which has created water out of a desert. What you're seeing is, again, intermittent pressure from the people who are going out. The regime no longer has legitimacy among its population. And the only way it controls the population is through brute strength, by turning off the internet, therefore trying to prevent the messages to go out to the free world. But they can't control it. You know, we're seeing images out of there. We're seeing social media being very active. There's reporting going on. Whether it is a mortal threat to the regime, it's hard to tell, but I'm confident that the regime is destined to end up on the ash heap of history, whether it's tomorrow or next year or 5 years from now.
We talked before about something, you mentioned sort of the UAE, Saudi Arabia, the new Abraham Accords, potentially Saudi Arabia will come and be part of that. But you also talked about something called the Cyrus Accords. What are they?
Cyrus Accords is a concept based on 2,500 years of friendship between Jewish people and Persian people, going back to Cyrus the Great, who was a great Persian king who liberated the Jews from Babylonia, allowed them to come to Jerusalem and helped them build a second temple. So there's a long history of friendship, and the last 40 years of the Islamic Republic is just a historic anomaly. So we foresee a time when we can recapture that friendship and allow people of Iran and people of Israel and the United States to create a peace that will reinvent the way the Middle East works. Because if you're trying to solve the Middle East, you have to solve Iran. And in order to solve Iran, I think you have to empower the people to see the benefits of what that could look like.
Final question, Len. What can the West do? What can the U.S. do to facilitate freedom in Iran?
Number one, we need to be supportive vocally. So my personal story, I came from the Soviet Union during the Cold War. I came to America. And one of the things that was really important for dissidents in the Soviet Union is hearing President Reagan be very forceful vocally in standing with dissidents in the Soviet Union. When Natan Sharansky, who's now an Israeli and member of various administrations here, when he was a Soviet dissident in prison, he used President Reagan's and other Americans' support for the Russian dissidents as strength to help them survive in prison. So number one, we need to be vocal and support the Iranian people and recognize that the Iranian people are not the same as the regime that rules over them. Number two, there are practical things that we can do that we've done from the American side. During the protests a couple of years ago, for example, we helped Iranians bypass the censorship of the regime. There are any number of programs, both overt and covert, that help Iranians practically. So I would call on our European allies, I would call on all of our allies to look at ways to do that. And finally, I would say the way to change the regime's behavior is to put more pressure on it, which is the opposite of what's happening right now. And it would be much more helpful if our allies joined us in that pressure to deny the regime the resources to cause terrorism around the world, to develop missile technology, to kill its own people, to assassinate people around the globe. Remember, the State Department has declared Iran the top state sponsor of terrorism for about 4 decades now.
Well, a lot of people are hoping and praying for that. Len Khodorkovsky, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much.